5 servers, each one more disturbing than the last. I've gone through federal court filings, international law enforcement investigations, and documented reports to build this iceberg around the most dangerous Discord communities ever discovered. We start at the surface, the cases that generated headlines and public outrage, and work our way down to the ones that took years of investigation to fully expose. Let's begin. Let's start with Server 1. At first, swatting sounds almost like another strange piece of internet slang. But behind the harmless-sounding name is one of the most dangerous forms of online harassment. The idea is simple, but terrifying. Someone places a false emergency call, convincing police that a violent crime is unfolding at a specific location. The caller might claim there is a bomb, a hostage situation, an active shooter, or even a murder in progress. Every second is designed to create panic, forcing heavily armed officers to rush toward people who have no idea they are about to become the center of a nightmare. The callers rarely leave a trail. They hide behind fake identities, anonymous phone services, and online tools that make it difficult for investigators to find them. From behind a screen, they watch as fear spreads in the real world. What begins as a lie over the phone can quickly turn into flashing lights, weapons drawn, and innocent lives hanging in the balance. For years, many treated swatting as little more than an extreme internet prank. That illusion shattered on December 28, 2017. The chain of events that day began over something almost impossible to believe: an online argument during a game of Call of Duty. 2 players, Casey Viner and Shane Gaskell, argued after a match that cost them a wager worth only $150. Their frustration spilled onto social media, where insults quickly turned into threats. What should have ended as childish trash talk instead took a deadly turn. Gaskill gave Viner an old address where he no longer lived, believing nothing serious would come of it. Viner then contacted Tyler Barris, a man already well known to law enforcement for making bomb threats and creating chaos across several states. Barris had a long criminal history involving false emergency calls and harassment, making him the perfect person to carry out the threat. Using internet calling services and public Wi-Fi to hide his location, Barris contacted emergency dispatchers. He claimed he had murdered a family member, taken hostages, and was preparing to burn down the home. Every detail was carefully chosen to trigger the strongest possible police response. But the people inside that house had absolutely nothing to do with the online argument. The home belonged to Andrew Finch and his family. They were living an ordinary evening, completely unaware that strangers on the internet had turned their address into the center of a fake emergency. Then, police surrounded the house. Inside, flashing lights reflected through the windows. Andrew's mother noticed the unusual activity outside and opened the front door to see what was happening. Moments later, Andrew stepped outside. Within seconds, officers shouted commands. Then, a single gunshot echoed through the night. One officer fired from across the street, striking Andrew in the chest. The bullet pierced his heart and lung. Although he was rushed to the hospital, he died just minutes later. An innocent man had lost his life because of an online dispute he never even knew existed. The horror did not end there. Andrew's grieving family was ordered out of the house, handcuffed, and taken in for questioning while trying to understand what had just happened. Early police statements offered few details, and only days later did officials explain that the officer believed Andrew had reached toward his waistband before the shot was fired. The tragedy became one of the most infamous examples of how deadly swatting could become. Yet, even after that devastating case, the practice continued. Years later, investigators uncovered another disturbing network operating through Discord. This time, the targets included activists, schools, airports, places of worship, entertainment venues, and private homes. One of the repeated victims was Melina Abdullah, a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, whose home was subjected to multiple swatting incidents. What shocked investigators most was not just the scale of the attacks, but the people behind them. According to police, the main suspects were teenagers between the ages of 13 and 16. Despite their age, they allegedly used sophisticated software, overseas servers, and privacy tools that allowed them to hide their identities while launching dozens of false emergency reports across the country. The investigation stretched across several states and even overseas. Working together, the LAPD, the FBI, and multiple local police departments traced the group's digital footprint. Search warrants were carried out, electronic devices were seized, and investigators uncovered evidence linking the suspects to more than 30 swatting incidents dating back to 2020. Authorities also found signs that many of the attacks appeared to be driven by racial hatred, adding another disturbing layer to an already frightening case. The suspects now face serious criminal allegations, including conspiracy and creating false emergencies, with investigators pursuing hate crime enhancements where evidence supports them. Perhaps the most unsettling part is not simply the crimes themselves, but how easily they can happen. A few clicks, a false phone call, and an anonymous user hidden behind a screen can send armed officers racing toward an innocent family. Platforms designed to bring people together can also connect those with far darker intentions. Server 2. The name 764 sounds mysterious, but its origin is surprisingly ordinary. It came from the last 3 digits of the zip code belonging to its creator, Bradley Chance Cadenhead, a teenager from Texas who used the online name Felix. Behind that simple number, however, was the beginning of something far darker. As a young teenager, Cadenhead reportedly struggled with severe bullying and behavioral problems. While searching for belonging online, he found a Discord community known as CVLT, where investigators say he learned methods of sextortion and child exploitation. By 2021, he had dropped out of school. That same year, he created 764, a group that would soon become one of the most disturbing online networks investigators had encountered. According to court documents, the community grew rapidly under Cadenhead's leadership. Discord representatives later confirmed that the first known 764 server appeared in early 2021. Federal investigators say the group deliberately targeted children across public messaging platforms, searching for those who appeared lonely, emotionally vulnerable, or struggling with their mental health. Their objective was chilling. Victims were manipulated into creating explicit material, live streaming acts of self-harm, and carrying out increasingly horrific demands while other members watched from behind their screens. The group's methods relied almost entirely on psychological control. Investigators uncovered guides shared through encrypted platforms that allegedly taught members how to identify emotionally fragile children and slowly gain their trust. Once a victim became dependent on the attention and approval of the group, that trust was turned into fear. Authorities describe 764 as operating like a pyramid. Leaders recruited vulnerable young people, then pressured some of those same victims into helping target others. The abuse became self-perpetuating. According to legal filings, children were allegedly forced to send explicit images, injure themselves, abuse animals, and perform degrading acts during live streams. Every recording became another tool for blackmail, ensuring victims felt trapped with no way to escape. The damage reached far beyond the internet. One victim was a 14-year-old girl from Oklahoma. Investigators allege that Cadenhead persuaded her to send a single intimate photograph before immediately using it against her. Under constant threats, she was allegedly forced to live stream increasingly degrading acts while believing her private images would otherwise be exposed. Eventually, the pressure escalated to demands that she take her own life on camera. Only the intervention of her mother prevented the tragedy from unfolding. Another heartbreaking case involved a 12-year-old girl from Finland. Prosecutors say she spent months being manipulated through Discord by a man later identified as Shahriar Javan, a medical student living in Germany. According to investigators, he alternated between kindness and intimidation, gradually convincing the child to carry out horrifying acts of self-harm and animal cruelty during live streams while other members watched. Even after she expressed that she simply wanted a normal life, prosecutors allege the abuse continued, with pressure increasing until she believed death was her only escape. Perhaps the most devastating case centered on a teenager named Jay Taylor from Washington State. Jay was already battling depression, but was receiving treatment and trying to rebuild his life. Hoping to make new friends who shared his interests, he reached out online looking for people who enjoyed crafts and crochet. Instead of finding companionship, investigators say he unknowingly crossed paths with individuals connected to 764. One user began talking to him regularly. Behind the scenes, prosecutors allege that person was acting under the direction of Shahriar Javan and following detailed instructions on how to manipulate vulnerable people into suicide. At first, Jay resisted. He spoke about feeling better and wanting to keep living, but the encouragement never stopped. Day after day, he was allegedly pressured into believing that dying together would somehow solve everything. Eventually, he agreed. In the early hours of January 2022, Jay quietly left his family home carrying an extension cord. He walked to a nearby parking lot while members of the online group prepared a live stream. Prosecutors allege the video call was created specifically so others could watch what followed. As Jay prepared to end his life, investigators say Javan continued directing the situation from behind a screen. When Jay finally carried out the act, members allegedly watched in real time instead of trying to save him. Authorities later claimed the recording was copied, shared across Discord, and even used to attract new members to the group. The investigation quickly expanded across international borders. German police eventually arrested Javan and searched his electronic devices, reportedly discovering massive collections of violent and exploitative material. Prosecutors charged him with Jay's murder, along with hundreds of additional offenses involving child exploitation. As awareness of 764 spread, law enforcement agencies began issuing public warnings. Discord stated that it had repeatedly reported the group to authorities and removed tens of thousands of accounts connected to the network, many of them believed to belong to repeat offenders. The company also reported repeatedly banning accounts linked to Cadenhead as he continued attempting to return under new identities. Cadenhead has since been sentenced to decades in prison for child exploitation offenses. Yet investigators and researchers warn that the story may be far from over. Because the material shared inside these communities is so illegal and secretive, researchers have only limited visibility into how many similar groups may still exist. Every account that disappears can be replaced by another under a different name. Every server that is shut down may quietly reappear somewhere else. That uncertainty is perhaps the most unsettling part of all. The faces change, the usernames change. Even the names of the groups may disappear. But somewhere behind another anonymous profile, hidden inside another private server, the cycle could already be starting again. Server 3. It often begins with something that no one would ever think twice about it. A post goes viral. Maybe it is an opinion, a joke, or even an innocent photo taken without a second thought. At first, the attention seems harmless. Then, the notifications start pouring in. Unknown numbers begin calling. Angry messages flood every account. Strangers who have never met the person suddenly know their name, where they work, and who their family is. The harassment grows faster than anyone expects. Employers receive endless complaints from anonymous people. Friends and relatives become targets simply because of their connection to the victim. Food deliveries arrive that were never ordered. Mailboxes fill with unwanted packages and junk mail. Online, disturbing videos appear showing complete strangers driving past the victim's home as if they are documenting every move. Before long, private information has spread across the internet, leaving the victim exposed to identity theft, break-ins, swatting, and endless fear. Even after the online attention fades, the damage remains. Financial problems, anxiety, and isolation continue long after everyone else has moved on. Much of this activity has been linked to communities built around doxing, where exposing private information becomes a twisted form of entertainment. Discord has repeatedly been criticized for hosting servers where users exchange methods, share personal information, and organize coordinated harassment campaigns. Some communities have even produced detailed guides explaining exactly how to uncover someone's identity and ruin their life. Ironically, people who joined these spaces out of curiosity sometimes became victims themselves. Several of these groups focused on targeting political opponents, while others searched for vulnerable people elsewhere on the internet. One of the places they frequently looked was 4chan, a website known for its countless anonymous discussion boards. While most people only recognize its larger sections, many of its smaller communities developed their own unique cultures, some far darker than others. Among the most infamous was a board known as Arnki. It was never intended to become what it eventually became. The board was originally created to encourage users to post original content rather than repeating the same jokes found across the internet. But its anonymous and unrestricted nature slowly attracted people who felt disconnected from society. Many struggled with loneliness, failed relationships, and a deep sense of hopelessness. Over time, those shared frustrations shaped the identity of the community itself. The conversations often revolved around rejection, isolation, and resentment toward a world that many users believed had left them behind. Humor mixed with despair until it became difficult to separate jokes from genuine pain. While not everyone there identified as an incel, the board gradually became closely associated with that culture. Discussions frequently blamed women and so-called normies, people viewed as socially successful, for their unhappiness. Although some users genuinely tried to encourage one another, the darker voices often became the loudest. As bitterness continued to spread, the atmosphere changed. Vulnerable people no longer found only conversation. They also became easy targets for manipulation. The board had become the perfect hunting ground for someone willing to exploit loneliness for personal gain. That was when a figure known as Reiko entered the picture. What first appeared to be another strange internet joke slowly took on a far more disturbing shape. Around 2018, Reiko built an online movement that became known as Reiko's Trap Harem. It grew from a popular internet meme but quickly transformed into something much more sinister. Reiko allegedly set out to convince lonely and emotionally vulnerable men that becoming feminine was the answer to all of their problems. What sounded absurd at first gradually became a carefully planned campaign aimed at people desperate for acceptance. The process allegedly began with friendship and encouragement. Isolated users were persuaded to experiment with cross-dressing and eventually convinced to share private photographs. By the time those images had been sent, many victims were already trapped. According to numerous allegations, Reiko then used those photos as blackmail, threatening to expose both the images and the victims' real identities unless they obeyed further demands. The pressure reportedly became increasingly extreme. Victims were allegedly pushed toward beginning hormone replacement therapy and making life-changing decisions they were never prepared to make. Every step was reinforced by fear, manipulation, and the promise that only complete obedience would finally earn them love and acceptance. Their deepest insecurities became the very tools used against them. The consequences were devastating. One alleged victim reportedly died by suicide during a live stream after becoming overwhelmed by the pressure and manipulation. The tragedy exposed just how dangerous online coercion could become when vulnerable people fell into the hands of someone determined to control every part of their lives. At its core, the controversy was never simply about internet culture or online jokes. It revealed how loneliness itself could be turned into a weapon. False promises of belonging were used to draw people deeper into manipulation until escape seemed impossible. By the time many realized what was happening, they had already surrendered their privacy, their trust, and sometimes even their hope. And in the shadows of these communities, where doxing, blackmail, and swatting often overlapped, it became clear that behind an ordinary screen, some of the internet's darkest traps were waiting for the next unsuspecting victim. Server 4. What began as what looked like another online community would slowly reveal something far darker. In 2019, a 23-year-old business student named Rohan Rane, an Indian immigrant living in Antibes, France, created a Discord server called CVLT. On the surface, it appeared to be a place where people could talk during the isolation of the COVID-19 lockdowns. But behind that ordinary beginning was a far more disturbing purpose. Rane would later admit that the server was built as a place where he could openly spread his hatred toward the Jews and Muslims. It wasn't long before people with extreme neo-Nazi and fascist beliefs gathered there, turning the community into something far more sinister than anyone on the outside could imagine. As the group grew, its true nature became impossible to ignore. In one online post, Rane described CVLT as dark and sadistic. He claimed that followers carved his name into their own skin and insisted everything he did was somehow legal. Even more disturbing, he openly admitted that the group's purpose was to attract vulnerable people simply to satisfy his own cruel desires. He wasn't operating alone. Colin Walker and Caleb Merritt became key figures inside the organization, helping manage the servers, maintain its online network, and decide who was allowed inside. Merritt, one of the group's earliest members, became especially notorious, using several online identities while allegedly grooming children. Together, the leaders created a strict hierarchy where members earned higher status by sharing increasingly disturbing and illegal content. The darker someone's actions became, the more respect they received within the group. Finding victims was frighteningly easy. Recruiters reached young people through popular platforms like Instagram and Roblox before directing them into private Discord channels. Once inside, trust was carefully built until victims were persuaded to send intimate photos. That single mistake became the beginning of a nightmare. Those images were immediately turned into weapons of blackmail, leaving victims trapped and terrified. The abuse only escalated from there. Prosecutors say the group deliberately targeted emotionally vulnerable children, forcing them to watch graphic videos of violence and animal abuse until they became numb to horrifying scenes. Once that barrier had been broken, victims were pressured into performing increasingly dangerous acts of self-harm while live-streaming themselves. They were threatened with having their private photos exposed to family members if they refused, and other members reportedly helped enforce those threats. Every act of humiliation and suffering became entertainment for the people watching behind their screens. Investigators believe the cruelty went even further. Victims were allegedly forced to injure themselves, shout hateful slurs, and endure relentless psychological abuse. Some were even swatted, putting them in real physical danger. In the most horrifying allegations, prosecutors say certain victims were pushed toward taking their own lives while others watched live. Authorities also believe additional suspects were involved, suggesting the network extended beyond the people who have already been identified. The first major breakthrough came in the spring of 2020, when an FBI agent began investigating after a heartbreaking case involving a 15-year-old American girl. After communicating with Rane online, she reportedly attempted to take her own life by slashing her throat. As investigators examined the evidence, they uncovered a familiar pattern. Rane had allegedly built what appeared to be a caring online relationship before convincing the teenager to share intimate images. Once he had them, the manipulation turned into relentless blackmail. Recognizing the growing danger, the FBI joined forces with French authorities. By October 2020, France's specialized investigators had opened a formal judicial investigation. Months later, on April 6, 2021, Rane was finally arrested. He now faces extremely serious charges, including torture, corruption of minors as part of an organized group, and organized extortion, while awaiting his final sentence in solitary confinement. What police discovered after the arrest only deepened the horror. Electronic devices recovered from his home reportedly contained numerous videos showing girls between the ages of 11 and 16 carrying out horrific acts of self-harm while crying in front of cameras. Instead of expressing regret, Rane allegedly described himself as a psychopath without emotion. He openly spoke about his fascination with fascist ideology and admitted that witnessing blood and violence gave him excitement. Investigators also uncovered a document he had written that allegedly explained how to manipulate young girls, describing them as prey while outlining methods of intimidation and psychological control. Even more alarming, reports claim he continued communicating from behind bars after gaining access to a phone. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, his explanations constantly shifted. He insisted the videos were staged, claimed the victims were consenting adults, denied links to other extremist groups, and attempted to distance himself from the crimes. At the same time, he admitted to harboring hatred toward humanity and acknowledged specifically targeting girls of Jewish and Muslim backgrounds, along with women who criticized fascist leaders. By then, what had started as an ordinary-looking Discord server had been exposed as something far more terrifying, a digital trap that hid unimaginable cruelty behind an ordinary screen. Server 5. It started with a sentence that sounded too strange to believe. A 13-year-old boy from Mumbai, whose identity has been kept private and is referred to as Aditya, calmly told his parents that he was leaving home for at least a year. They laughed it off, convinced it was nothing more than childish imagination. But when night fell and he still had not returned, that uneasy feeling turned into panic. His family rushed to the local police station where investigators began the search. Security cameras offered no answers. It was as if the boy had simply disappeared. Then, while questioning his friends, officers uncovered a small clue that would change everything. One of them mentioned a Discord server Aditya had invited him to join, though he had never accepted the invitation. Police entered the chat room and began reading the conversations. Slowly, the mystery started to unfold. Aditya had not been kidnapped. He had chosen to run away. The server itself seemed almost ordinary. Only 3 teenagers, all between the ages of 13 and 18, filled the chat with conversations that at first sounded like harmless dreams, but hidden beneath those messages was a shared plan. They wanted to leave their families behind and build a completely new life in Goa, believing they could escape their problems and start over. The Discord server had become far more than a place to chat. It was where they comforted one another after arguments with their parents or difficult days at school. Every disappointment pushed them closer together, and every conversation made running away seem less like a fantasy and more like the only answer. Eventually, they packed their belongings and left Mumbai behind. What they failed to realize was that they left a trail with every message they sent. Aditya continued talking to his mother on Instagram throughout the journey, allowing investigators to track his location through his internet activity. The same technology that had connected the teenagers also quietly revealed where they had gone. When police examined the chat logs, they discovered another troubling detail. The teenagers believed they could live in an orphanage in Goa while finding work nearby. They arrived full of hope and went directly to an orphanage, hoping to be accepted. Staff members immediately sensed something was wrong and refused to take them in. With their plan already collapsing, they checked into an expensive hotel instead. Within a single day, nearly all of their money was gone. The dream that had seemed so convincing online quickly fell apart when faced with reality. Investigators later described the case as a painful example of teenage optimism mixed with deep loneliness. The children had not wanted to disappear forever. They dreamed of becoming successful before returning home on their own terms, hoping one day to make their families proud. Instead, they found themselves stranded, frightened, and completely unprepared for the world they believed they could conquer. When police finally located them, the excitement had vanished. The teenagers looked exhausted and confused, realizing their carefully imagined future had lasted only a matter of hours. Thankfully, they were reunited with their relieved parents, ending a frightening chapter before it became something much worse. But not every story ends that way. Around the same time, Another investigation was unfolding hundreds of miles away in the United States, and this one carried a far darker ending. Authorities in Louisiana received information that a missing 17-year-old boy had been taken to a mobile home in St. Petersburg, Florida. Investigators believe he'd been lured through Discord by people promising him a better life. When officers arrived, they found not only the missing teenager but another 16-year-old living in the same trailer alongside several adults. What they discovered inside was horrifying. Police described the trailer as filthy, filled with animal waste, cramped cages, and unbearable living conditions. One teenager slept on a thin mattress with almost nothing around him except dirt and neglect. Investigators soon learned that the promises made online had been nothing but bait. Authorities alleged that the teenagers had been groomed, manipulated, and sexually exploited for months. One of the adults falsely claimed to be the younger boy's father, but could provide no proof. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered another shocking truth. The 16-year-old had also been reported missing nearly a year earlier. According to investigators, he had been introduced to the suspects through someone the family trusted. After leaving home, he vanished into a hidden world where he was allegedly isolated, denied school and medical care, and repeatedly abused alongside the older teenager. As police closed in, several suspects fled, triggering a statewide investigation that lasted months. Eventually, 7 people were arrested and charged with crimes including human trafficking, conspiracy, interference with custody, and sexual battery. The contrast between the two cases is impossible to ignore. One group of teenagers escaped before lasting harm was done. The other fell into the hands of predators who had hidden behind anonymous usernames and friendly conversations.